All right, so this morning as we get going, I have a little project that I want us to do, and in just a moment, I'll give you a little bit of time to think through it, and here's what's going to happen. I'm going to have everyone's going to stand up, and then we're going to start we'll start on this side. We're going to start right here, and the best person in the room is going to stand here, and then the second best, and the third, and we're just going to go all the way to the back and to the worst person. If we have to weave around, we can do it, whatever. I mean, we'll take as much space as we need to. Are y'all ready? All right, we're not going to really do that. Some of y'all are like, how can we get out in the parking lot right now? Because I don't even want to know where I am. And some of y'all are probably thinking, I deserve to be at the front. I don't know where you are. But have you ever... Have you ever wondered, have you ever thought how good is good enough? What does that mean? Have you ever maybe asked the question of yourself, what makes a person good, or what makes a person bad, or how do I know if I'm good enough for God, or for myself, or for my family, or for whoever it is? Well, when Jesus was alive, there was a group of religious leaders, a group of people who really spent their entire lives trying to be good, or at least looking good. We call them the Pharisees. That's what they called themselves. And the thing about the Pharisees is that they really had an advantage on looking good, on making sure that they were always at the front of the line because, well, they made up the rules, right? And have you ever played a game with someone who changes the rules or makes up the rules as you go along? Isn't that your favorite person to play with, right? Don't you just love it? You're halfway through. Maybe it's a game you know somewhat, but you're not familiar. And we always call that, what do you call it? Texas rules. That's what we call it in our family, which basically meant you just made it up and did what you want to do, whatever it was. Many years ago, I was playing on a flag football team in a church league, right? And so we would go out and we'd play the games on Saturday mornings, a bunch of different churches in the community, and we usually spent about half our time arguing about the rules. Now, I know that we're Christians and we're supposed to all get along and be nice, but this is football, and Jesus wants you to win, right? And so you fight and you argue about it, and I just got really frustrated, so I said, all right, at the end of the season, I offered to write out a set of rules. I know you know the basic rules of football, but every version of it's a little bit different. So I got together and looked up a bunch of stuff and wrote up some rules for our flag football league and gave it to all of the different teams ahead of time, and everyone agreed, and then we just spent half the time arguing about why my rules were wrong, and so I just gave up, right? Because rules are interesting. So some of us don't like rules unless they're rules to our own advantage, right? I mean, if you're really good, and if you've been around whatever it is, whether it be the church or your work or your industry or your family, you probably have learned how to make the rules work to your advantage. And so today we're going to continue working our way through the Sermon on the Mount, and this sermon that Jesus is giving us, where he's telling us and showing us and helping us understand how we can build a life on him, and the firm foundation, a life that will withstand all the storms and the challenges and difficulties of life. He's not promising it will be easy. Life will be easy if you do the things he says in the Sermon on the Mount. You'll still face the storms. The difference will be that your life will stand. And today Jesus comes to a section where he really does address this issue of how good is good enough. How good do I have to be to make God happy? How good do I have to be considered a good person in God's family? How good do I have to be able to say that I am in order to say that I've built my life on Jesus? And he's going to go through this whole series of sort of some statements and some responses to, and some of you are going to be familiar with this, but I want to challenge us to really look at this and maybe even in a new and a fresh way see what Jesus is saying with us, because he starts each of these sections with a statement, a statement that pretty much everyone who was listening would agree with. For instance, in Matthew 5:21, he says, "You have heard that it was said to our ancestors, do not murder. Now, he's really going out on a limb here, isn't he? Right? I mean, this is a statement that everyone's going to go, I don't know about this, Jesus. No, I mean, the truth is that you see that and you go, yeah, that makes sense. Murder's bad. We shouldn't take the life of another person and just especially for selfish and man-centered reasons. And in fact, I would guess that you look at this and everyone would go, I agree with that. I hope everyone in here would agree. Maybe not. If not, we'll talk later, but with one of our law enforcement people. But I think that most of you would agree that murder's just a bad thing. And so he says it, do not murder. Jump down to verse 27 and he says something else. He says, you have heard that it was said, do not commit adultery. And again, I know adultery is more common in their world just as it is in our world, but I think most of us would agree that adultery is not good. It's bad. It's a sin. Again, we can see it even if it's common, even if it's a part of the world that we live in. We hear that. We hear about people committing adultery and go, yeah, that's not good. That's bad. And so Jesus says, you've heard that it was said, do not commit adultery. He keeps going, and this one's a little bit trickier for us. He says that verse 31, it was also said, whoever divorces his wife must give her a written notice of divorce. Now understand what he's saying in their time, because in Jesus' time, women literally had no rights, and a man could what they call put out, right? They could put out a woman. And in fact, there was one Pharisee, one religious leader who said that if your wife burnt your food too often, you had the right to put her out. Those are not my words. I'm not agreeing with that, okay? I'm just saying that's what they said. Don't take it out on me. I'm just telling you what it was, right? And so what would happen is that a man could then say to a woman, hey, if you don't do what I tell you to, the way I tell you, the way that I want, I'm going to put you out. I'm not going to give you a certificate of divorce. I'm not going to actually end the marriage. I'm just going to put you out, which means that you don't have the ability to remarry. And since women didn't have many job opportunities and the ones that they had were not good, it allowed the man to have a lot of power and to use his power to get what he wants. And Jesus is saying, hey guys, using your power to manipulate or control another person is bad. It's sin, right? And I think we can agree with that. Even if we've done it or had it done to us, or even if that's a part of life, we can agree that using your power to manipulate and control another person who is weak and vulnerable or doesn't have the same options that you do, he goes, that is bad. So Jesus goes through these statements, right? And there's a couple of others, but you get the idea that what he's going through is he's saying that these things that everyone looks at and goes, yeah, they're bad. And in fact, you might be thinking if this is the standard, I get to come up to the front part of the line, right? If this is the standard that we have to live by of not murdering, of not committing adultery, of not taking advantage and intentionally hurting other people to get them to do what we want, then we might go, you know what, I think I get to move up on the line a little bit. But if you know the story, if you know the sermon, Jesus doesn't stop there, does he? So let's go back to verse 22, right after do not murder. He says, but I tell you, Jesus is saying, I tell you, everyone who is angry with his brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Whoever insults his brother or sister will be subject to the court. Whoever says, you fool, will be subject to hellfire. Can we just say this is a little bit different? A little bit more difficult? I don't need you to raise your hand, but has anyone gotten angry with anyone this week? Or insulted someone this week? Or called someone a fool this week? And I'm not just talking about just driving down the road either. I'm just saying in life, think about your boss. When they're not looking, you go, that idiot. Think about the celebrity or the politician or the neighbor or that family member who just every time you see them, it's like fingernails on a chalkboard, and you talk about them and you tear them down and you insult them. And Jesus here is saying that, guess what? responding and treating people and responding to them in anger, insulting people and tearing them down, using your words to attack another person, whether they're there or not, is completely irrelevant. He says using your words to attack another person is like murder, and guess what? That's bad. And so suddenly this whole idea that where some of us are moving back a little bit in the line, aren't we? Because this is something I think many of us struggle with. And so let's go to the next one. Let's look in verse 28. He says this. He says, but I tell you, everyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And I'm going to guess some of you are squirming a little bit right now because this is not our favorite one to talk about, and many of us would like to skip over. But Jesus is saying, if you've looked at another person and thought, what if? What if I had married them instead? What if we could spend time together and no one would know about it? What if no one knew what I did or could get away with them? He's saying if you're thinking and looking at another person and thinking, what if you're lusting, he's going, you've committed adultery. This is his words, like if you don't like it, you can take it up with Jesus, okay? He says that you've committed adultery in your heart, and guess what? Adultery is bad. And so suddenly we're starting to move back the line a little bit, aren't we? Right? We start up here feeling good because I've never murdered, I've never cheated, I've never taken advantage of another person. And what Jesus is saying is like, hey, let's see this a little bit differently. And he's going that if you've ever thought and lusted, you've committed adultery. And we're starting to move back down the line a little bit. The last one that I want to look at here, verse 32 says, but I tell you, everyone who divorces his wife, except in a case of sexual immorality, causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So again, this is a little more difficult for us to see, but I'm convinced that the people who were listening to Jesus knew exactly what Jesus was talking about. Because if a man could put out or divorce his wife because she did not do what he wanted her to do, he could feel like, well, you know what, I legally have a right to do that. And he was right. He legally had a right. If she was unpleasing to him, he could put her out. And maybe he went a step beyond and gave her a certificate, like let her have the option to remarry. And then maybe he could find another woman who had been put out, because men who put out women don't get to marry women who haven't been put out, right? And so he's saying to them, all you're doing is using your power to control and hurt and cause damage, and in the process you are causing other people to sin. And the Bible says that one who causes another to sin is worse than the one who commits the sin. That's why Jesus says if you cause one of his children to stumble, right, he says take a rock, tie it around your neck, and throw yourself in the ocean. He says it's worse. And suddenly people are going, wait a minute, I technically had the right to do this. And God's going, yeah, you technically had the right, but in the following the technical side of the law, what you end up doing is hurting another person. And the result is that you are causing others to sin. And that is bad. And the people there, I can only imagine what they were thinking and listening as Jesus, each of the statements starts with something like, hey, I haven't murdered, good for me. And Jesus going, yeah, have you called someone a fool this week? And like, ooh, oh, I've never committed adultery. Have you ever looked at someone and thought, what if? He going, oh, I've never gotten a divorce, but hey, have you ever used your position to control or manipulate a person or cause them harm? And suddenly everyone's going, I have a feeling if we had been there, very few of us would have been looking up at Jesus, and most of us would have had our heads lowered as he discusses and makes sin and takes it to a whole nother level. It is a standard that none of us can even come close to living up to, can we? In fact, even if we did my little fake exercise where we all lined up from best to worst, right? I don't know how we're going to figure that out. I'll choose for you. Not really. But we stand that even suddenly the one in the best, the whole line starts to back up further and further away from Jesus, doesn't it? Because what he's saying is, guys, there's a whole nother level that you are not seeing. In fact, he even goes further. We don't have time to read it today. I encourage you to look at it. He even goes far and says the solution to this sin that's in our heart, that's just as damaging as the sin in our actions. He says the solutions are incredibly extreme. He says that if you've been angry and you've called someone a fool, he says, do not even come to church to worship until you fix that. Like he says, you should not even come and gather with other believers to worship until you fix that. Imagine Jesus saying, don't come to church until you go to that person and tell them you're sorry. Tell them I was wrong. Tell them I messed up. Man, I need Jesus to go to Walmart. I don't know how much I could do it without, you know what I'm saying? I mean, think about what he's saying. He's saying it's best to not even show up until you get that right. He says that, hey, if your hand or your eye are causing you to stumble, and he's talking about in the context of lust, and I'll let you figure out what all of that means. He says, poke it out or cut it off. He says that would be better for you than to go around pretending like you're a great person because you never have committed adultery, but in your heart being, unfaithful. He says that you should stay married except for in the most extreme of circumstances. And here's what the point that Jesus is making. He's making it to them, and he's making it to us today, because we can look at this and go, well, I guess none of us are going to measure up. I guess none of us deserve to be children of God or to be in God's presence. But Jesus is teaching us something even more important. He's teaching us that your intentions matter. Right, that you may look good on the outside. That you may have everyone else fooled and thinking that you get to be in the front of the line. You may even, compared to everyone else, get to stand at the front of the line. You may be great at following all of the rules. And hear me, I've told you, I grew up going to church. I know how to follow all the rules. I know how to look good on the outside, and many of you do as well, because you spent your whole life being told, do these things and you're going to be a great person, and you can look good on the outside, but if your heart is not right, Jesus, that's what he's looking at. In fact, if you remember the story of David, King David, when God was calling David to be the next king of the nation of Israel. And he goes to Jesse's house, David's father, Samuel does, because that's where God tells him to go. And Jesse brings out all of his sons and he lines them up, right? Lines them up from the best, from the oldest, the strongest, the best looking, the best warrior, the smartest, and he lines them all the way up. And God sends Samuel to the first one. He says, no, that's not him. And the next one, no, that's not him. Next one, no, that's not him. The next one, no, that's not him. And he gets down to the end and he's going like, Jesse, do you have any other kids? Because none of these are the ones. And Jesse goes, well, yeah, but he doesn't count. Right? The prophet of God is coming to your house and said one of your sons is going to be the next king, and you don't even bother to bring David in. That's not good parenting, by the way. Okay, I just throw that out there. And God, they send for David, and David, little scrawny David, the guy who writes poetry and plays the harp. David, who's, he can protect the animals, but no one looks at him as like a great warrior. And God says to Samuel, that's the one. And why does he say that? Because man looks at the outward, but God looks at the heart. You see, your intentions, your heart, ultimately is what matters. And what God knows is that if we have the right heart, we'll have the right actions. And while we can fake our actions, we can look good for a while, eventually our heart is going to reveal itself, especially when the storms come, especially when life is hard, especially when things aren't going according to my plan. And it feels like, remember at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, the rains are coming and the wind is blowing and the water is rising and everything is shaking. And what's on the inside in that moment, that's what's going to come out. And it's the exact same thing that Jesus is saying here is, guys, you can look really good on the outside, but if the inside is rotting, it will eventually all fall apart. And what Jesus is doing here is not making it harder on us. What Jesus is doing here is challenging us to deal with your heart. But can we also be honest that dealing with our heart is not easy? That we would rather deal with our outward actions and the way that we look to other people than we would deal with what's on the inside. I mean, this is the reason that many of us make rules that we can follow, right? That we shoot the target, shoot the arrow, then walk up to wherever the arrow lands and draws the target around it. That sometimes it looks things like when I was growing up, one of the things was, hey, make sure you never, ever, ever, ever drink. And that's just drinking is always bad. I'm not advocating for drinking, but I remember growing up hearing that message time and time again. And then we would go to a church potluck and we would see people put enough food to feed a small family on their plate. And the Bible calls that gluttony. Or we would buy everything that we can possibly buy because we need more and more and more, and we think that's going to satisfy. And the Bible calls that greed. I think about times where I've heard people say, I go to church every single Sunday and every Wednesday and every time the doors open, but they never take the time to invite someone to Jesus. I think about people who give to the needy, but never get to know or invest in the life of a broken person. Think about people who post all the right stuff on Facebook, but never are willing to be uncomfortable in their own faith to follow Jesus. You see, we'll draw the target around the things that are easy for us. And there are things that are easy for all of us. There are rules. Like honestly, and I'm not saying I'm above this or better than that. I've never been in a situation where I thought, I'm literally going to kill that guy. Like I've thought, man, it wouldn't be bad they got hit by a truck. No, not really. But I've never really been there, right? I've never gotten to that point. So for me to say, hey, guess what? Don't murder and you're great with Jesus is easy for me to say. But loving that person that's not easy to love? Like really loving the person that's not easy to love in real ways, not just saying I love you, but in my actions and with my life, that's a different thing, isn't it? And what Jesus is warning us here, one of the things is make sure that you're not making rules that make you look good. Any rule that makes me look good and not Jesus is bad. You see, the Bible isn't given to us. The rules, the laws, even in the Old Testament that Jesus is talking about, are not given to us to make us good. They're given to us to show us how much we need Jesus. So sometimes instead of dealing with our heart, we make rules that we can follow. Sometimes we just give up and do what's easy, which is what our world has adopted as their philosophy and motto. There's no right or wrong. Just do what feels right. And we even say that, anyone who disagrees or anyone who says something is wrong or something is right, all they're doing is being judgmental. After all, that's just the way I am. And sometimes we say things like, it doesn't matter, I'm not hurting anyone. And we forget that sin always hurts. It always hurts our relationship with God, our relationship with people. It hurts our own life and the purpose and the being that God made us for. And so what we end up doing is we say, you know what, I know God says this is what's right and wrong, and we either focus on the things that we can follow or we just do whatever we feel like doing, and we begin to ignore God's truth. And the more that we ignore God's truth, the more that we make excuses for why it doesn't apply or why it doesn't matter or why I can do whatever it is that I want to do, our heart becomes hard. And pretty soon what was once unthinkable becomes normal in our lives, becomes normal in our families, becomes normal in our world. And it's all because we'd rather just do what's easy than deal with our heart. It's all because we make rules that we know that we can follow, and we focus on the things that are easy for us, and we judge everyone else because why can't they do what we do? Or we look around and say, how are you to judge me? I should be able to, this is just the way God made me. And this, my friends, is the reason that I think we need to stop trying to be good and let Jesus fill your mind. you're never going to measure up. Right? I mean, just look at the list Jesus gave us, and that's just real brief. I mean, apply that same principle to every one of the laws in the Ten Commandments, just those, and think about it. You and I are never going to measure. In fact, I don't even think I measure up to the rules that I have for other people. Like, if people treated me the way that I treat them, I'm not sure if I would like it. If people acted the way that I act sometimes, I'm not sure if I would like it. So even if I look at my own standard of what it means to be good, of what it takes to get you to the front of the line here, even if I judge the world on that and judge myself on that, I realize even I don't measure up to my own standard, much less God's. And I think that the more that we focus on rules, this is what I can do to look good. This is what I can do to move from the back of the line to the front of the line. What is the focus on? It's on myself. And a life that's focused on myself will always fail. That's why Jesus moved the idea of sin from just our actions to our mind and our heart. And so we try to control behavior. But behavior is just a reflection of what's on the inside. And so that's why this morning I want to challenge you to think about doing two things in your life. And listen, before you apply it to someone else, make sure you're applying it to your life. Because it's easier to apply this to someone else than it is to me. And the first thing is that we need to cut out the junk. You ever really consider the junk you're letting in your life? Look, I know that the world is full of it, but we're bombarded with it. I get it. There are just certain things we can't control, certain things unless I can't do this and go la, la, la and close my eyes and ignore the world. I've got to live here. I understand that some of you have to work in places that are really difficult, and you're bombarded with just sin and ugliness and brokenness, and I'm not talking about that. You can't always control that. I'm asking you, what are you choosing to let into your heart, to let into your mind, to let into your family? Think about the news that we watch. Now I'm getting a little personal here. But we watch hours of it. And does any of it point us to Jesus? Think about the media that we allow into the movies and the shows and the videos and the social media and all the different stuff that we sometimes spend hours consuming in our lives. Think about the music that we listen to. Think about the people that we allow to influence us. Are those things encouraging us to follow God, to honor Him, to take one step closer to Him? Or are they saying, you know what, you do what's right for you? You know what, you don't have to deal with that because you're better than all those other people who are different than you. And what we've done in our world, what we've done in our society is that we've filled our minds with stuff that may even seem somewhat good, right? Just sort of good, at least better than all of those other people. And God goes, I don't want you to be better than other people. I want you to fill your life with me. And the only way we're going to do that is if we're willing to cut out the junk in our lives. Cut out the things that fill us and that tell us you follow your own heart, you do what's right for you. You can, hey, as long as you feel good about it, that's all that really matters. And Jesus is saying you need to get rid of that in your life because it is a lie straight from the pit of hell. And sometimes we do this and just say, come on in, Satan. And we bring him right into our lives. So what would it look like to turn off all the junk for 1 hour a day? That's my challenge for you this morning. 1 hour a day where there's no social media, where there's no news. Trust me, you won't die, okay? I promise, right? Where you're not listening to people or music or shows that are just the opposite of God honoring, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, and you know it in your life, and we make all kinds of excuses, but what would it look like to just turn it off for 1 hour a day? What would it look like if you turned it off for 1 day a month? Like, I know, so you mean I can't watch the news for one whole day? Try it. You mean I can't flip through and watch my TikTok videos? I know David really likes TikTok videos, but, I can't do that for one whole day? You mean I can't watch those shows for one day or read that for one day? I'm asking you, would you give an hour a day a month, and then maybe even a week a year, where you just turned it all off and said, Jesus, this is your time and not for me to fill my life with junk? What would it look like to cut out some of the junk in your life? Because I'm convinced if you'd give God an hour a day and a day a month and a week out of the year, you might realize how little you need some of the stuff that seems so necessary for us. But we don't just need to cut out the junk in our lives. We also need to make sure you fill your mind with Jesus. Because if all you do is just get rid of stuff, you're going to fill it with something else. Right? And I don't need you just to sit on the couch and stare off into space. I don't know how to do that, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not just talking about getting rid of stuff. I'm asking you, would you take that same hour and fill it with something that honors God? Read the Bible. Meditate on one scripture. Listen to a sermon or a podcast of someone who's going to encourage you to think deeper about the things of God. Just 1 hour. Just an hour a day. I promise you have it. I promise it's there. If you'll look for it and you can find it, and just take some time where we fill our hearts and minds with the thing of Jesus. Same thing. What would it look like to do a day, a month, or maybe you just got rid of only the necessary things and the rest of the time you just spent in God's Word? And what would it look like if for a week, while you cut out all of the media, all the junk, all the stuff, if you spent that time in God's Word or listening to podcasts or listening to music that draws you closer to Jesus, whatever it is, and you begin to focus on Him and allow Him to fill your life. Because here is what I truly believe, because I've seen it time and time again in the lives of others. I've seen it in my own life. I've seen it in my family, that when we take a little bit of time and get rid of junk and we fill it with the things of God, pretty soon we begin to change from the inside. And a life that's changed from the inside will change what we do on the outside. His Word, His worship, His purpose, His people. Fill your life with those things, and pretty soon we're not trying to be good any longer. We're trying to look like Jesus. And it's the natural result of a life that's filled with Him. You see, a Christ-filled mind will live a Christ-filled life. And so I challenge you. What's the junk you need to get rid of? And what do you need to start filling your mind, your heart, your life with? And let Jesus change you from the inside out.